I calmly asked my daughter-in-law not to smoke because my lungs were failing. My son snapped, "Shut up, old man. You stink worse than the smoke." And then he slapped me across the face. His wife smirked, raising her wine glass in a toast to my humiliation. The guests laughed. They thought I was just a helpless, sick old man living on their charity. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who actually paid for the roof over their heads. I checked my watch. 10 minutes. That was all the time they had left before their entire world crumbled. Before I tell you how I destroyed their ego, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is non-negotiable. My name is Bernie Kowalski. I am 68 years old, and for the last 40 years, I built an empire of asphalt and diesel. I started as a truck driver sleeping in cabins and eating diner food, and I ended up owning one of the largest logistics fleets in the Midwest. But looking at me, you would never know it. I wear flannel shirts, I drive a 10-year-old pickup, and I carry an inhaler in my pocket because decades of diesel fumes gave me COPD. I look like a man who has nothing, and that is exactly what I let my son Brandon and his wife Vanessa believe. It was a Saturday in late August, humid and heavy, the kind of Chicago weather that sits on your chest like a wet blanket. We were in the backyard of the sprawling suburban estate that Brandon called his own. It was a housewarming party, or rather a coronation. The house was worth $2.5 million. It had marble floors, a swimming pool, and a kitchen that cost more than my first house. Brandon and Vanessa had invited everyone they wanted to impress. There were bankers, local politicians, and social climbers holding champagne flutes. I stood by the edge of the patio trying to stay out of the way. I felt like a stain on their perfect picture. Vanessa was holding court near the rose bushes. She was 28, beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, and she was chain-smoking. She knew I had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. She knew that secondhand smoke made my chest feel like it was being squeezed by a vice. But she lit her third cigarette in 20 minutes, took a long drag, and exhaled a thick gray cloud directly toward me. I coughed. It was a wet, rattling sound that made a few guests turn their heads in disgust. I took a step back, pulling my inhaler from my pocket, but the smoke followed me. It clung to the humid air. "Vanessa," I said, my voice raspy and weak. "Please. You know my lungs. Could you maybe smoke on the other side of the patio?" Vanessa turned slowly. She looked at me with eyes that held zero warmth. She flicked the ash from her cigarette, and it landed on the toe of my worn-out work boot. "This is my house, Bernie," she said, her voice loud enough to attract attention. "I will smoke where I want. If you cannot handle it, maybe you should go inside. Or better yet, go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You are ruining the vibe." I stood there, gripping my inhaler. "I am not trying to be difficult," I wheezed. "I just need to breathe." She laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Then hold your breath. Honestly, you are just a guest here. A moocher. You contribute nothing to this household, so you have no right to make demands." That was when Brandon walked over. My son. The boy I had put through private schools. The boy I had shielded from the hard labor I had endured. He was wearing a suit that cost $3,000, holding a glass of scotch. He saw his wife looking annoyed, and he saw me coughing. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer me water. "What is the problem now?" Brandon asked, glaring at me. "Your father is trying to police me in my own backyard," Vanessa said, playing the victim perfectly. "He is making a scene about the smoke." Brandon turned on me. His face was red, flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Dad, seriously, you are going to embarrass me in front of my investors." "I am not trying to embarrass you, son," I said, fighting for air. "I just asked her to move downwind." "Shut up," Brandon snapped. "Just shut up. You are always complaining. You are always sick. You know what? Oh, you stink worse than the smoke. You smell like old medicine and failure." Do not ever speak to my wife like that again. He stepped closer, invading my personal space looming over me. The guests had gone silent. The music seemed to stop. Everyone was watching the successful young CEO put his decrepit father in his place. "Brandon," I said, trying to maintain my dignity. "I bought this how he didn't let me finish." He swung his hand and slapped me. It wasn't a playful tap. It was a full-force strike across my face. The sound was like a whip crack. The force of it knocked me off balance. I stumbled back and fell into one of the expensive wicker chairs. My inhaler skittered across the patio stones. My cheek burned. My ear rang. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ice-cold shock in my chest. My son had hit me. He had struck the man who taught him to walk, the man who paid for every single thing he owned. There was a gasp from the crowd, but nobody moved to help me. Nobody stepped forward. They just watched, eyes wide, mixing horror with a twisted kind of entertainment. Vanessa smirked. She looked down at me with pure triumph, took another drag of her cigarette, and blew the smoke directly into my face as I lay in the chair. "Get him out of here," Vanessa said to Brandon. "He is killing the mood." Brandon adjusted his cuffs, looking at the guests with a practiced apologetic smile. "I am so sorry, everyone. My father he is not well. The dementia, you know. He gets aggressive. We are handling it." Dementia. That was their narrative. That was the lie they were building to bury me. I sat up slowly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I reached down and picked up my inhaler. I took a deep puff, letting the medicine open my airways. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my old battered flip phone. I did not look at Brandon. I did not look at Vanessa. I looked at the time. It was 7:42 p.m. I opened a text message thread with a contact listed only as Mr. Blackwood. I typed 3 words and 2 numbers. "Execute Article 66. I hit send. Then I closed the phone and put it back in my pocket. I sat there in the wicker chair watching them. Brandon and Vanessa had already turned back to their guests. They were laughing now, the tension breaking as they refilled glasses. They thought it was over. They thought they had exerted their dominance. Brandon wrapped his arm around Vanessa's waist, and she whispered something in his ear that made him chuckle. They looked like the kings of the world. I sat and waited. 1 minute passed. Vanessa lit another cigarette. 2 minutes. Brandon shook hands with a man I recognized as a local banker, probably bragging about his assets. Assets that did not exist. 5 minutes. I watched the smoke rise into the evening sky. My cheek still throbbed, a steady rhythmic pulse of pain that kept me focused. They ignored me completely. To them, I was just a piece of furniture, a broken thing to be discarded once the party was over. I saw Vanessa point at me and roll her eyes to her friend. I saw the friend giggle. They were celebrating their cruelty. They felt safe. They felt untouchable in their castle. 8 minutes. I saw the headlights first. They swept across the tall hedges that lined the driveway. It wasn't just one car. It was a convoy. 9 minutes. The sound of heavy tires on gravel crunched over the music. The guests near the side gate started to turn around, confusion rippling through the crowd. 10 minutes. The music cut out completely. The side gate to the backyard was thrown open with a metallic clang. Brandon spun around furious. "Who the hell is driving on my lawn?" he shouted, marching toward the gate. "This is private property." But he stopped dead in his tracks. Entering the yard was not a lost delivery driver. It was a phalanx of men in dark uniforms. On their chests in bold yellow letters was the word security. They were big men, stone-faced and moving with military precision. Behind them walked a man in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Blackwood. Brandon looked confused, then angry. He puffed out his chest. "Who are you?" "Get out of here before I call the police." Mr. Blackwood ignored him. He walked straight past Brandon, straight past Vanessa, and came to a stop in front of me. The guests parted like the Red Sea. Mr. Blackwood looked at me sitting in the chair with my red cheek and my flannel shirt. Mr. Kowalski Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the silence. We received the signal. "Are you injured?" I stood up. I dusted off my pants. "Yes," I said calmly. "I was assaulted, and the terms of the agreement have been violated." Brandon stormed over, grabbing Blackwood's shoulder. "Hey, I am talking to you." "Who do you think you are talking to, my father?" "I am the owner of this house." Blackwood turned. He removed Brandon's hand from his shoulder with a slow, deliberate movement that suggested extreme danger. He looked at Brandon with the kind of boredom a shark might have for a minnow. "You own nothing," Mr. Brandon Blackwood said. "What?" Brandon laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Are you crazy? My name is on the deed." Blackwood opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He held it up for the guests to see. "Actually," Blackwood said, his voice projecting across the yard, "this property is held by the Kowalski Family Trust. You and your wife are listed merely as conditional tenants." Vanessa pushed forward, her cigarette burning down to the filter. "That is a lie. Bernie gave us this house. It was a gift." "It was a conditional occupancy agreement," Blackwood corrected her. Clause 14, Section B clearly states that your residency is contingent upon the respectful care and housing of the grantor, Mr. Bernard Kowalski. He turned a page. And Clause 66 states that any act of physical violence, verbal abuse, or endangerment of the grantor's health results in the immediate termination of the tenancy and immediate eviction. Brandon's face went pale. He looked at me. "Dad, what is this? Tell him to leave." I looked at my son. The mark of his hand was still hot on my face. I looked at Vanessa, who was staring at the security guards with her mouth open. "You broke the contract, Brandon," I said. "I asked you to stop the smoke. You slapped me. You terminated your own lease." "This is insane," Brandon shouted. "You can't evict us. We have rights." "We have guests," Blackwood snapped his fingers. Two of the security guards stepped forward. "Mr. Kowalski has invoked the immediate eviction protocol," Blackwood said coldly. "The locks are already being changed. Your assets inside the house have been frozen pending an audit of the trust's funds. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises." "Audit," Vanessa screeched. "What audit? We are aware of the misappropriation of funds," Mrs. Kowalski Blackwood said. "But that is a matter for the lawyers tomorrow. Tonight, you leave." "Now wait a minute." Brandon lunged toward me, his fists balled. "You senile old—" "He never reached me." One of the security guards intercepted him, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. Brandon yelped in pain, forced to his knees on the expensive patio stones he was so proud of. "Let him go!" Vanessa screamed, rushing forward, but another guard blocked her path, standing like a wall of concrete. The guests were backing away, phones out, recording everything. The humiliation was total. The king and queen of the suburbs were being dethroned in real time. "Get them out," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The guards hauled Brandon to his feet. He was struggling, shouting threats, shouting that he would sue, that he would kill me. They dragged him toward the gate. Vanessa was escorted behind him, still holding her wine glass, until a guard gently took it from her hand and set it on a table. "I am not leaving without my purse," Vanessa shrieked. "My keys, your car is leased by the company," Blackwood said. "That lease has also been terminated. You can walk." I watched them. I watched my son and his wife being frog-marched out of their own party. They were kicking and screaming, looking back at me with eyes full of hatred and confusion. They passed the bankers and the socialites who were now whispering and pointing. They were thrown out onto the street, the heavy iron gate slamming shut behind them with a finality that echoed in my bones. The party was over. The guests, realizing the free champagne was about to stop, began to scurry toward the exits, avoiding eye contact with me. Within minutes, the backyard was empty. I stood alone in the silence. I took a deep breath. The air was clearing. The smoke was gone. Mr. Blackwood walked over to me. "The house is secure, sir. The locks are changed. We have a team sweeping for any other unauthorized occupants. Do you want us to call the police regarding the assault?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let them simmer tonight." I walked over to the sliding glass doors and entered the house. It was cool inside, quiet. I walked through the massive living room with its white leather sofas that I was never allowed to sit on because my clothes were too dirty. I walked into the kitchen with its double islands and professional-grade appliances that Vanessa used to reheat takeout. I sat down in the master armchair at the head of the dining table. It was a chair Brandon always claimed. I sat there alone in the mansion I had paid for, and I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. But I knew this was just the beginning. Brandon and Vanessa were not the type to give up. They were greedy, and now they were desperate. They were out on the street, humiliated with no access to their money. They would strike back. I pulled out my phone again. I had a notification from my bank. An attempt had been made to access the corporate account. Access denied. They were already trying. I looked at the security monitor on the wall. I could see them outside the gate. They were standing on the sidewalk shouting into their phones. Brandon was pacing like a caged animal. Vanessa was crying or pretending to cry. Then I saw something that made me sit up straighter. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Brandon ran toward it, waving his arms. He was pointing at the house. He was pointing at the gate. I zoomed in on the camera. I could see Brandon's face. He was not looking scared anymore. He was looking vindictive. He was talking fast to the officer. Mr. Blackwood came into the room. "Sir, the police are at the gate. Your son is claiming illegal eviction." "Let them in," I said. But then I saw Vanessa step forward. She pushed Brandon aside and spoke to the police officer. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at her own face, then pointing at the house. She was putting on a performance. Blackwood's phone buzzed. He looked at it and frowned. "Sir, we have a problem." "What is it?" I asked. "The officer is requesting entry. Your daughter-in-law is claiming domestic abuse. She is claiming you attacked her. She says you are mentally unstable and a danger to yourself and others. She is demanding an involuntary psychiatric hold." I looked at the screen. Vanessa was wiping fake tears from her eyes. She was playing the victim card, the only card she had left. She knew that if she could get me committed, if she could get me declared incompetent, the power of attorney she had tried to get me to sign months ago might act as a foothold. They were not just trying to get back in the house. They were trying to lock me away. "Let them in," I said again, standing up. Blackwood looked concerned. "Sir, if they have a compelling story..." "I have something better," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. "I have the truth." I walked to the front door as the police pounded on it. I opened it. The officer stood there, hand on his holster. Brandon and Vanessa stood behind him, smirking. They thought they had found a loophole. They thought they could use the law against me. "Mr. Kowalski," the officer asked, "we have a report of a disturbance." Officer Vanessa sobbed, pushing forward. "He is crazy. He attacked us. He thinks he owns the house. He needs help." I looked at Vanessa. I looked at the smear of mascara running down her cheek. "You really want to do this?" I asked her quietly. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper so only I could hear. "We are going to bury you in a nursing home, old man, and we are going to take everything." I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all night. "Officer," I said, "before you take anyone anywhere, I think you should see the security footage from the patio. And while you are at it, you might want to look at this medical file." I held up a folder Blackwood handed me. "What is that?" Brandon asked, his smirk faltering. "This," I said, "is the evidence that your wife is not a registered nurse anymore. And this," I held up a second paper, "is the toxicology report from my blood test yesterday." Vanessa's face went white. "You thought I didn't know?" I asked her. "You thought I didn't know what you were putting in my soup?" The officer looked from me to Vanessa. Her confidence evaporated. "This is just the beginning," I told them. "Run." But they didn't run. They froze. And that was when I knew the real war had just started. The neon sign outside the motel buzzed with a dying flicker, casting a sickly red glow into the cramped room. It smelled of stale tobacco and mildew, a stark and brutal contrast to the Italian marble floors and fresh roses of the mansion they had been standing in just 2 hours ago. Brandon paced the stained carpet like a caged animal, kicking the cheap particle board furniture. His $3,000 suit now looking out of place and ridiculous in the dim light. He was screaming at the walls, cursing my name and shouting about his inheritance, his rights, and how I had humiliated him in front of the city elite. He was a man who had lost his kingdom, and he was looking for something, anything, to break. But Vanessa was not screaming. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. She was not panicking, she was calculating. The shock of the eviction had worn off, replaced by a cold, serpentine, focused rage. She knew that legally they were cornered. The trust documents were ironclad, and the assault was on video. In a court of law, they would lose. But Vanessa knew that the court of public opinion did not require evidence. It only required a good story and a tearful face. She pulled out her phone. Her eyes were dry and hard like flint, but I knew exactly what she was capable of. She had been a nurse once before she was stripped of her license for theft, and she knew how to play the part of the caregiver. She reached up and roughed up her hair, pulling strands loose until she looked frazzled. She rubbed her eyes vigorously until they were red and puffy. She even tore a small rip in the collar of her blouse. It was a transformation. In seconds, the arrogant socialite vanished, and a terrified, exhausted victim appeared. Brandon stopped pacing. He looked at her confused. "Oh, what are you doing, Vanessa?" She didn't answer him. She just held up a finger, silencing him. She opened a live stream app on her phone, the one where she had thousands of followers who envied her lifestyle. She took a deep, shaky breath and hit the record button. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "I know I usually post happy things. I know you guys are used to seeing our parties and our life, but I cannot hide it anymore. I just cannot." She paused, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. The viewer count started to tick up rapidly. People love a tragedy, especially when it involves the rich and beautiful falling apart. "Tonight was supposed to be our housewarming," she continued, her voice breaking, "but it turned into a nightmare. You guys know Brandon's dad, Bernie, right? We have been taking care of him for years. We built that house for him. We wanted him to be safe, but the dementia, it is getting so bad." She looked at Brandon and gestured for him to come into the frame. He hesitated, but then he understood. He sat next to her, slumping his shoulders, adopting the look of a defeated son. "He does not know who he is anymore," Vanessa told the camera. "He gets so confused. And tonight he snapped. He got violent. He started screaming that he owned everything. He hit Brandon." She turned the camera slightly to show a small scratch on Brandon's neck, probably from his own collar. "See what he did. And then he kicked us out. He called these men, these security guards he hired in his paranoia, and he threw us out on the street. We are in a motel right now because we are scared to go back. We are scared of what he might do." The comments began to fly up the screen. "Poor you, that is horrible. Dementia is so hard. Stay safe." Vanessa leaned into the camera, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But that isn't the worst part, guys. And this is really hard for me to say, but I think you need to know why we are really scared. It is not just the violence. It is the way he looks at me. She shuddered, a theatrical, full-body tremor. When Brandon is at work, Bernie would come into my room. He would say things, disgusting things. He would try to touch me. And when I told him to stop, he would just laugh and say he paid for me. He thinks because he has money, he can do whatever he wants to me. That was the spark that lit the fire. The internet mob does not wait for facts. They heard a young woman claiming harassment. They heard a story of a rich, powerful old man preying on his daughter-in-law. The comments shifted from sympathy to outrage. Call the police. Lock him up. He is a predator. Vanessa watched the comments roll in, and a tiny, satisfied glint appeared in her eyes, masked by her fake sobbing. We tried to get him help, she said. We tried to get doctors involved, but he is so manipulative. He hides it so well when strangers are around. But tonight, we are done protecting him. We are done being victims. We just want to be safe. Please, guys, just pray for us. And if you see him, do not approach him. He is dangerous. She ended the stream. The moment the camera cut off, her posture straightened. The tears vanished instantly, as if a faucet had been turned off. She looked at Brandon and smiled a smile that would freeze hell over. There, she said, her voice steady and cold. By tomorrow morning, he won't be able to show his face in public without someone spitting on him. Brandon looked at his wife with a mixture of fear and admiration. You said he touched you. That is a heavy accusation, Van. It is our word against his, she said, shrugging. And who is the world going to believe? The crying girl in a cheap motel or the angry old man alone in a mansion? We just destroyed his reputation, Brandon. And once the public hates him, the police will have to act. We are not just going to get the house back. We are going to put him in a psych ward where he belongs. They sat back in the dim red light of the motel room, watching the view count on the archived video audio climb higher and higher. 10,000 views, 50,000. It was spreading like a virus. They thought they had launched a nuclear strike. They thought they had won the narrative war. They had no idea that by going public, they had just exposed themselves to a scrutiny they could not survive. They had lit a fire, yes, but they didn't realize the wind was blowing back in their direction. I sat in my study miles away, watching the same video on my tablet, my lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, standing silently beside me. I watched her lies. I watched the world turn against me. And I simply reached for the file that contained the truth about Vanessa's nursing license. The war had moved from the physical to the digital, and I was ready to return fire. The pounding on the heavy oak door was not a request. It was a command. It reverberated through the empty hallways of the mansion, a sharp, authoritative rhythm that signaled the arrival of the state. I did not need to look at the security monitor to know who was standing on my front porch. I had been expecting them for hours. The viral video had done its work. The internet mob had screamed for intervention, and now the machinery of the system had arrived to grind me down. I sat in the high-backed leather chair in the study, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was not hiding in the dark. I had turned on every light in the house. I was not wearing stained pajamas or looking like the confused, disheveled predator Vanessa had painted me to be. I was wearing a crisp, button-down shirt and trousers freshly shaved, my inhaler sitting neatly on the side table next to a glass of water. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my lungs against the chronic tightness that was my constant companion. The pounding came again, louder this time. "Police, open up!" I stood up slowly, using the armrest for leverage, and walked to the foyer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The humidity of the night rushed in, clashing with the cool air of the house. 3 people stood there. 2 police officers, their hands resting near their belts, their postures tense and ready for a struggle. Between them stood a woman in a beige raincoat, holding a clipboard and a tablet. She had the tired, hardened look of someone who had seen too many broken homes. Adult Protective Services. Mr. Bernard Kowalski, the woman asked. Her voice was firm, projecting a tone of authority meant to subdue a confused mind. I am Bernie Kowalski, I said, my voice steady and low. Please come in. You are letting the bugs in. The officers exchanged a glance. They had clearly been briefed to expect a raving lunatic, a man swinging a cane or screaming obscenities. Instead, they found an old man inviting them into a foyer that was cleaner than a hospital. They stepped inside, the woman leading the way. Mr. Kowalski, I am Case Manager Sarah Jenkins with Adult Protective Services. These are Officers Miller and Davis. We are here to conduct a welfare check based on multiple urgent reports regarding your safety and the safety of others. You mean the video? I said, closing the door behind them. The one where my daughter-in-law is crying in a motel room. Jenkins narrowed her eyes. We are aware of the video, sir. We are also reacting to a formal complaint filed this evening alleging domestic battery and severe cognitive decline resulting in dangerous behavior. Under the circumstances, we have the authority to place you under an emergency psychiatric hold for evaluation. An emergency hold. That was the legal term for dragging me out of my home in handcuffs and locking me in a padded room for 72 hours. It was exactly what Brandon and Vanessa wanted. Once I was in the system labeled as incompetent, they could petition the courts for emergency guardianship. They could seize the house. They could seize the accounts. It was a terrifyingly efficient trap. I understand, I said. You have a job to do. But before you put me in the back of your car, Ms. Jenkins, I would invite you to sit down. I have coffee brewing, and I have some reading material that I believe will clarify the situation. We are not here for coffee, sir, Officer Miller said, stepping forward. We need to ascertain if you are a threat. Do you have any weapons on you? Only the truth, I said. And in my experience, that is usually enough. I turned my back on them and walked toward the dining room. It was a calculated risk. If they thought I was fleeing, they would tackle me. But I moved with a deliberate, slow purpose. I heard their footsteps following me. I gestured to the long mahogany dining table. It was empty, except for 2 neat stacks of documents, one bound in a blue folder, the other in a red one. Please, I said, sitting at the head of the table. Sit. Ms. Jenkins hesitated, then sat. The officers remained standing, flanking her. Mr. Kowalski? Jenkins started, her tone softening just a fraction. The allegations are serious. We have reports that you don't know what year it is, that you hallucinate, that you attacked your son. It is 2024, I said. The current president is in his first term. Yesterday, the S&P 500 closed down 2 points, and I did not attack my son. I evicted a tenant who physically assaulted me. I slid the blue folder across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Ms. Jenkins. Open it, I said. She opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the first page. It was a comprehensive cognitive evaluation from Dr. Aris, one of the most respected neurologists in Chicago. It was dated just 3 days prior. I have COPD, I told them. My lungs are dying. My brain is not. I knew my son was maneuvering to have me declared incompetent months ago. He started asking questions about my memory. He started moving my keys to make me think I was losing them. So I took the liberty of getting tested, voluntarily. Jenkins read the summary. Patient exhibits above average cognitive function for his age group. No signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or cognitive decline. Reasoning and memory faculties are intact. She looked up at me, confusion replacing her professional mask. This report is brand new. I like to be prepared, I said. My son says I am crazy. That report says I am sharper than he is. But that is only half the story. You are here because you believe I am a danger to women. You believe the tearful story of my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. She claims you harassed her, Jenkins said quietly. She claims you are a predator. She claims a lot of things, I said. Vanessa is a very convincing storyteller. It is a skill she perfected in her previous career. I slid the red folder across the table. "What is this?" Jenkins asked. "That," I said, leaning forward, "is the reason Vanessa Kowalski is no longer a registered nurse in the state of Illinois. It is a public record, though she went to great lengths to have it sealed. My lawyer, however, is very good at unsealing things." Jenkins flipped open the red folder. The officers leaned in to look. It was a disciplinary hearing record from the state nursing board dated 4 years ago. "You will see," I narrated as they read, that Vanessa didn't lose her license because of a clerical error. She didn't lose it for incompetence. She was stripped of her license and barred from practice for the systematic theft of narcotics from hospice patients. Fentanyl, morphine. She was stealing pain medication from the dying to sell to her friends. The silence in the room was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed deafening. "She is a predator, Ms. Jenkins," I said, my voice hardening. "She preys on the weak. She preys on the old. She married my son because she thought I was next. She thought I was a quick payday. And when I didn't die fast enough, when my lungs kept working, she got impatient. She started poisoning the well. She started projecting her own crimes onto me." Jenkins looked up from the file. Her face was pale. The narrative she had walked in with the helpless young woman and the monster old man had just been shattered. She was looking at documented proof that the victim was a woman capable of stealing comfort from the dying. This changes the context," Jenkins admitted, closing the folder. "It changes everything," I corrected her. "You are here to protect a vulnerable adult. I am that adult. I am being targeted by 2 people who are desperate, broke, and willing to say anything to get control of my assets. That video, that live stream, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a weapon. It was an attempt to use you, the police, and the state as their personal hit squad." Officer Miller shifted his stance. He looked less like a guard and more like a man who realized he had almost made a terrible mistake. "Mr. Kowalski, if this is true, if she filed a false police report—" "She did," I said. "And I have the security footage of the assault she claimed happened tonight. It shows my son striking me. It shows me sitting in a chair struggling to breathe while she laughs. Would you like to see it?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled out my phone and cast the video to the large television mounted on the dining room wall. The grainy night vision footage played out in high definition. The slap, the smoke blowing, the laughter. Ms. Jenkins watched the screen, her mouth a tight line. She watched Vanessa smirk. She watched Brandon hit his father. She saw the truth. "Turn it off," Jenkins said softly. I clicked the screen off. "Mr. Kowalski," Jenkins said, standing up. She looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't pity. It was respect. "I apologize for the intrusion. It appears we were given incomplete information." "You were lied to," I said. "It happens. She is very good at it." "We will not be executing the psychiatric hold," she continued. "In fact, I will be filing a report regarding the false claims made to my department. Filing a false report of elder abuse is a felony in this state." "I know," I said. "My lawyer will be in touch with your office in the morning to provide copies of all this evidence." The officers nodded to me as they turned to leave. They looked angry now, but not at me. They were angry at the waste of time, angry at being manipulated. Ms. Jenkins paused at the door. "Mr. Kowalski, you should know. Even with this, they won't stop. People like that. When they get cornered, they get dangerous." "I am counting on it," I said. She left, closing the heavy door behind her. I locked it. I walked back to the dining room and gathered the files. I had won the battle. I had kept my freedom. But the war was far from over. I had humiliated them publicly, and now I had turned the law against them. They were out there in that cheap motel, stewing in their hate. They had no money, no home, and now no credibility. But a cornered rat is the most vicious kind. They would not just go away. They would try something desperate. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Blackwood. "It is done," I said. "Now cut off the money, every cent. Let's see how much they love each other when the credit cards stop working." The morning sun did not bring relief. It only brought the harsh reality of a hangover and an empty wallet. Brandon left Vanessa in the motel room, her face buried in a pillow, to hide the mascara stains and the swelling of her ego. He put on his wrinkled suit, the one that cost $3,000, but now looked like it belonged in a donation bin, and marched out the door. He had a plan. He was going to sue me into oblivion. He was going to find the sharks in the legal world and feed me to them. I sat in my home office watching the notifications on my secure banking app. I knew exactly where he was going. He was heading to the glass tower downtown, the one that housed the offices of Sterling and Associates, the most aggressive litigation firm in Chicago. They were expensive, ruthless, and exactly the kind of people Brandon admired. He walked into their lobby with the swagger of a man who still believed he was the crown prince of a trucking empire. He demanded to see a senior partner. He told the receptionist that this was a matter of urgent corporate restructuring and elder abuse. He used his title Vice President of Kowalski Freight like a shield. They ushered him into a conference room. I can imagine him sitting there, leaning back in the leather chair, trying to look powerful, despite the fact that he hadn't showered. He told the lawyer a story of a senile father who had lost his mind and illegally seized assets. He painted himself as the concerned executive trying to save the family business from a madman. The lawyer listened. Lawyers always listen when they smell money. And Brandon smelled like money. Or at least the credit card in his pocket did. "I'll take the case," the lawyer said. "We will file an emergency injunction to freeze your father's assets and contest the eviction. But first, we require a retainer, $50,000. Brandon didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy platinum American Express card. It was the company card issued to him as the vice president. It had a limit that could buy a small house. He had used it for years to fund his lifestyle, to buy Vanessa jewelry, to pay for his gambling trips to Vegas. He thought it was a bottomless well. He slid the card across the polished mahogany table. "Put it on that," he said with a smirk. "And add a $5,000 rush fee. I want him served by noon." The lawyer smiled and took the card. He walked out of the room to process the payment. I watched the screen on my phone. A red alert popped up. Attempted transaction. Sterling legal. $55,000. Status declined. Reason card canceled. I took a sip of my coffee. I had canceled that card exactly 4 minutes after the security team threw him out of my backyard. In the conference room, the lawyer walked back in. He was not smiling anymore. He placed the card on the table and slid it back to Brandon with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "The card was declined, Mr. Kowalski." Brandon laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "That is impossible. It is a corporate account." "Try it again. It must be a chip error." "We tried it 3 times, the lawyer said, his voice dropping 20 degrees in temperature. "The issuer states the account has been closed. Do you have another form of payment?" Brandon patted his pockets. He pulled out his personal debit card. He handed it over. 2 minutes later, the lawyer returned. "Insufficient funds." The air in the room changed. The shark smelled blood, but it wasn't mine. It was Brandon's. "Mr. Kowalski," the lawyer said, standing up, "we are a billable hour firm. If you cannot provide a retainer, we cannot provide representation. Please leave." "But you don't understand," Brandon stammered, his face flushing a deep beet red. "My father locked me out of my accounts. This is temporary. I am the VP of a $10 million company. Just call my finance department. They will authorize a wire transfer." The lawyer looked at his watch. "You have 5 minutes to vacate the building before I call security." Brandon was thrown out onto the sidewalk for the second time in 12 hours. He stood there amidst the morning commuters, furious and confused. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the finance director at Kowalski Freight. He was going to scream at someone. He was going to fire whoever had messed up his credit cards. I have a recording of that call, too. "This is Brandon Kowalski," he shouted into the phone. "Why is my card declined? I am at a lawyer's office and I look like an idiot. Fix it now." There was a pause on the line. Then a voice he didn't recognize answered. "Mr. Kowalski, this is Sarah from Human Resources. The finance director is currently in a meeting with the new owners." "New owners," Brandon whispered. The phone almost slipped from his sweaty hand. "What new owners?" "Kowalski Freight was acquired this morning at 8 a.m., Sarah said, her voice professional and detached. "The acquisition was finalized by the majority shareholder, Mr. Bernard Kowalski. All executive accounts have been frozen pending the transition. I sold it. I sold the company I built with my bare hands. I sold it to my biggest competitor for a fair price, not because I wanted to retire, but because I needed to cut the cord. As long as I owned the company, Brandon thought he had a future. He thought he had a safety net. I had to burn the net. But I am the vice president." Brandon screamed, "You can't sell it without telling me. Actually, Sarah said your position was terminated as part of the sale agreement. Your access to the building has been revoked. And Mr. Kowalski, there is one more thing." What Brandon snapped. "The new owners have initiated a forensic audit of the books starting with your department. A process server is on his way to your last known address with a notice of investigation regarding $500,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over the last 18 months. The line went dead. Brandon stood on the busy street corner, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the silence. $500,000. The gambling debts. The online poker. The money he had siphoned off thinking I was too old and too stupid to notice the discrepancies in the ledgers. I had noticed. I had tracked every cent. I had just been waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. He dropped the phone to his side. He looked at the glass reflection of the building. He wasn't a vice president anymore. He wasn't a millionaire in waiting. He was unemployed, broke, and facing a felony embezzlement charge. He had tried to use my money to destroy me. Now he didn't have enough money to buy a sandwich. I put my phone down on my desk. The financial strangulation was complete. He had no lawyers. He had no job. He had no company. And soon the auditors would be handing their findings to the district attorney. But I knew Brandon. He wouldn't see this as a consequence of his own greed. He would see it as an act of war. He would go back to that motel room, and he would tell Vanessa that I had stolen his birthright. And Vanessa, desperate and vicious, would realize that the legal route was dead. She would realize that the only way to get the money now was to stop me from testifying, to stop me from breathing. They were cornered animals now, and cornered animals do not surrender. They attack. I checked the security system on the old estate house one more time, ensuring the cameras were recording. I had set the stage. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into the final trap. The envelope sitting on the mahogany desk was thin, innocent-looking, the kind you might expect to contain a utility bill or a birthday card. But the look on Miller's face told me otherwise. Miller was a private investigator who had spent 20 years in the Chicago police force before the red tape choked him out. He was a man who had seen bodies pulled from the river and crime scenes that would make a statue weep. He did not rattle easily. But tonight, sitting in my study with the rain drumming against the reinforced glass, he looked pale. He looked at me not as a client, but as a man who had just walked out of a burning building without realizing his coat was on fire. "Read it," Miller said, his voice rougher than usual. I reached for the envelope. My hand had a slight tremor. For months I had blamed it on the COPD, on the lack of oxygen reaching my brain. I had blamed my fatigue, my confusion. and the sudden bouts of nausea on the fact that I was pushing 70. I thought my body was simply giving up a machine worn down by decades of diesel fumes and hard miles. I slid the paper out. It was a toxicology report from a private lab, one that didn't ask questions and delivered results in 24 hours for a premium fee. I scanned the columns of numbers, the medical jargon that usually made my eyes glaze over. But two words jumped out at me, highlighted in yellow by Miller's marker. Arsenic. Benzodiazepines. I put the paper down. The room seemed to tilt slightly, a sensation I had become used to over the last 6 months. I looked at Miller. Arsenic, I asked. Like rat poison chronic exposure, Miller said. It is not enough to kill you overnight. That would look suspicious. An autopsy would catch a massive dose. No, this is microdosing. Just enough to make you sick. Just enough to damage your nerves, mess with your heart rhythm, and simulate the decline of a dying old man. He pointed to the second highlighted word. And the benzos. High-grade sedatives. Valium, Xanax, or a cocktail of both. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a violence that made me nauseous. The memory hit me sharp and clear. It was 3 months ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the mansion, gasping for air after a coughing fit. Vanessa was at the stove. She was humming. She played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law so well back then. She brought me a bowl of soup. It was tomato bisque, rich and creamy. Here, Bernie, she had said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness. I made this special for you. It has herbs for your lungs. Drink it while it is hot. I remembered the taste. It was slightly metallic, a little bitter under the heavy cream and basil. I had complained about it once. It tastes off, Vanessa, I had said. She had smiled, patting my shoulder. It is the new medication the doctor gave you, Bernie. It messes with your taste buds. Don't be difficult. Just eat. It will help you sleep. And it did help me sleep. I would eat her special soup, and an hour later the fog would roll in. My limbs would feel heavy, my thoughts would turn to mush. I would lose time. I would wake up in my chair at 3 in the morning, drooling, unable to remember the evening news, and the next morning Brandon would look at me with pity and say, Dad, you were talking to yourself again last night. You didn't recognize us. You are getting worse. They were gaslighting me. But not just with words. They were doing it with chemistry. She was a nurse, I whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Miller nodded grimly. She knew the dosage. She knew how to mask the symptoms behind your COPD. The shortness of breath, the confusion, the weakness. It all looks like natural progression to a lazy doctor. But the blood test doesn't lie, Bernie. You have enough arsenic in your hair follicles to kill a horse if it was given all at once. And the sedatives. That explains why you felt crazy. They were drugging you to manufacture the dementia symptoms they needed for the competency hearing. I closed my eyes. The betrayal went deeper than money. It went deeper than the house. This was biological warfare. They were dismantling me cell by cell, turning me into a zombie so they could strip mine my life. And the inhaler. I asked, a sudden, terrifying thought gripping me. We tested the residue on the mouthpiece, Miller said. He pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket. It contained my spare inhaler, the one I kept in the kitchen drawer. It tested positive for pulverized sedatives. Every time you tried to breathe, you were inhaling a knockout drug. I stared at the plastic bag. The device that was supposed to save my life was being used to shorten it. This changes everything, Miller said. This isn't just elder abuse anymore, Bernie. This is attempted murder, premeditated, calculated, slow-motion homicide. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds of my estate. The anger that had been fueling me, the hot burning rage, suddenly turned into something else. It turned into ice. Cold, hard, and unbreakable. They tried to kill me, I said softly. They didn't just want my money, they wanted me dead. Miller stood up too. We take this to the police now. With the lab report and Vanessa's history of drug theft, they will arrest her tonight. No, I said. I turned back to him. Miller looked confused. Bernie, they are poisoning you. If we go to the police now, I said, Vanessa will claim it was accidental. She will claim I mixed up my own meds. She will claim the arsenic came from contaminated water or food. She is a liar, Miller, and she is good at it. She will create doubt. She will get a lawyer, and she might walk away with a slap on the wrist for negligence. I slammed my hand on the desk. I don't want negligence. I want them buried. I want them to face a jury for attempted murder in the first degree. I want life sentences. So what do we do? Miller asked. We let them think it is working, I said. I picked up the toxicology report and folded it, sliding it into my inner jacket pocket next to my heart. They are desperate, I continued. Brandon is broke. Vanessa is exposed. They think I am winning the legal battle, but they also think I am sick. They think the poison is already in my system. They think time is on their side if they can just accelerate the process. I looked at Miller. I need you to leak something. Leak what I want you to leak, a rumor to Brandon's old contacts. Tell them that the stress of the eviction has caused a rapid decline in my health. Tell them I am bedridden at the old estate house. Tell them I am alone, confused, and rewriting my will tonight, to leave everything to a cat shelter because I can't remember my son's name. Miller raised an eyebrow. You want to bait them? I want to give them an opening, I said. Vanessa knows the poison takes time, but if she thinks I am changing the will, if she thinks the money is about to disappear forever, she won't wait for the arsenic to work. She will get impatient. And when they get impatient, Miller finished, they get sloppy. Exactly. I walked over to the wall monitor that showed the security feeds. The house was a fortress, but every fortress has a gate. I am going to fire the night security team tomorrow, I said. I am going to leave the back gate unlocked. I am going to sit in this chair alone in the dark. Bernie, that is suicide, Miller said. If they come, they won't come to talk. They will come to finish the job. I patted my pocket where the report lay. I know. That is why you and the police will be in the safe room downstairs, watching on the monitors. We need to catch them in the act. We need them to break in. We need them to come for me with intent. Miller looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the trucker who had stared down blizzards and unions and mobsters in the 80s. You are playing a dangerous game, old man, Miller said. I smiled a thin, cold expression. I am not playing Miller. I am hunting. I sat back down and picked up my pen. I had one more document to draft. A fake will. One that would be sitting right here on the desk, waiting for them. A piece of cheese for the rats. Go, I told Miller. Spread the word. Tell them Bernie Kowalski is dying, and he is giving away the empire. Miller nodded and left the room. I was alone again. I touched my chest. My lungs wheezed a familiar, painful sound. But for the first time in years, I knew it wasn't just the dust and the smoke. It was them. I looked at the photo of Brandon on the bookshelf, a picture from his graduation. He looked so proud, so innocent. I took the photo frame and placed it face down on the shelf. That boy was dead. The man who replaced him was a stranger who tried to stop my heart with soup and inhalers. I turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room into shadow. Let them come. I was ready. The air conditioner in the motel room rattled like a dying engine, spitting out lukewarm air that smelled of wet dust and despair. It was the only sound in the room for a long time. Brandon sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb fracture from when he had thrown it against the wall an hour ago. He was trying to order a pizza, a simple pepperoni pizza, but the app kept rejecting his payment. Insufficient funds. Account frozen. Card declined. The digital red letters mocked him. He looked up at Vanessa. She was standing by the window, peering through the gap in the heavy curtains, watching the parking lot, as if she expected the FBI to kick down the door at any second. She was chain-smoking again, filling the small room with a blue haze that made Brandon's eyes water. "We have $12, Brandon said, his voice hollow. "That is it, Vanessa. $12 in cash. I can't even buy us dinner." Vanessa didn't turn around. She took a long drag and exhaled slowly, the smoke hitting the glass. "Then stop whining and figure it out, Brandon. You are supposed to be the man. You are the vice president. Fix it." "I am not the vice president anymore," Brandon shouted, standing up. The sudden movement made him dizzy. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 24 hours. "I am a fugitive, Vanessa. I am being investigated for embezzlement because you said nobody would notice the withdrawals. You said my dad was too sick to check the books." "He was supposed to be sick," Vanessa snapped, spinning around to face him. Her eyes were wild, rimmed with red. She looked like a cornered animal, beautiful and dangerous. He was supposed to be confused. He was supposed to be dying. "You said he was weak. You said he was a pushover." "I didn't know he was tracking us," Brandon said, pacing the small space between the bed and the bathroom. "I didn't know he had a private investigator. And that video van, that live stream, it ruined us. Everyone knows. My friends, my old frat brothers, they are all blocking my number. You said the crying act would work. You said the public would be on our side." "It would have worked if your father hadn't pulled my nursing record," she hissed. "Who keeps a disciplinary file from 4 years ago? He has been planning this. He played us, Brandon. He sat in that big house and laughed at us." She walked over to the dresser and picked up the last bottle of water. She drank it greedily, not offering him a drop. "We need to leave," Brandon said. "We need to take the car and go to another state. Maybe we can start over." "With what money?" Vanessa laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Gas costs money, Brandon. Food costs money. And you think we can just run? You embezzled $500,000. They will find us. We will be living in a trailer park within a week, waiting for the cops to drag us in. Is that what you want? Is that the life you promised me I promised you?" Brandon stopped pacing. He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman he had stolen for the woman he had betrayed his father for. "I gave you everything, Vanessa. I bought you the car. I bought you the clothes. I put a roof over your head. I did everything you asked. And look where it got us," she sneered, gesturing around the filthy room. "A Motel 6 on the highway. You are useless, Brandon. You are weak. You couldn't even stand up to an old man with bad lungs." Brandon felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was a realization he had been pushing away for months, ever since they got married. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the contempt in her eyes. "Do you even love me?" he asked. The question hung in the stale air, so heavy and pathetic. Vanessa looked at him. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. She walked over to him, invading his space, and looked him up and down with a sneer of pure disgust. "I loved the potential, Brandon. I loved the penthouse. I loved the black card. I loved the idea of being the queen of Chicago logistics. But you..." She poked him hard in the chest with a manicured fingernail. "You are just a disappointed little boy waiting for daddy to die. And you couldn't even do that right. You are a failure. And I don't love failures." The words hit him harder than a physical blow. The illusion of their partnership, the US against the world narrative she had spun, shattered instantly. She wasn't his partner. She was a parasite. And he was the host she had sucked dry. "I should go to the police," Brandon whispered. "I should turn myself in. Maybe if I cooperate, if I tell them everything you did with the pills." Vanessa's hand shot out and grabbed his jaw, squeezing tight. Her nails dug into his skin. "You say a word," she hissed, her face inches from his, "and I will tell them you forced me. I will tell them you beat me. I will tell them the embezzlement was all your idea, and I was just a scared wife doing what she was told. Who do you think they will believe, Brandon? The man who already assaulted his father on camera, or the crying woman? He pulled away from her, stumbling back onto the bed. He was trapped. He was broke, hungry, and married to a monster. Suddenly, Brandon's phone buzzed. It was a text message. He looked at it expecting another debt collector or a hate message from social media. But it wasn't. It was from a guy named Mike, a former logistics manager at the company, one of the few who hadn't blocked him yet. The text was short. Hey man, just heard the rumor. Your dad is in bad shape. They say the stress caused heart failure. He is at the old estate house, bedridden. Heard he is calling lawyers to rewrite the will tonight. He is giving it all to charity. Thought you should know. Brandon stared at the screen. His heart hammered against his ribs. What is it? Vanessa asked, seeing the change in his face. He is dying, Brandon said, his voice trembling. Dad, he is at the old estate. Mike says he is crashing. Vanessa snatched the phone from his hand. She read the text. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the words, processing the information like a computer. Rewriting the will, she murmured. Tonight. She looked up at Brandon. The contempt was gone, replaced by a frantic, manic energy. This is it, she said. This is our chance. What chance? Brandon asked. He is dying, Van. It is over. No, you idiot. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. Don't you see? The poison is working. It was slower than I thought, but the stress pushed him over the edge. He is dying, but he is not dead yet. And he hasn't signed the new will. So Brandon asked, So if he dies before he signs that new will, you are still the next of kin, Vanessa said, her words tumbling out fast. The trust dissolves. The assets revert to the estate. And you are the only heir. We get everything, Brandon. The money, the properties, everything. But only if he dies tonight. She paced the room, her mind racing. But if he signs that paper, if he gives it to charity, we get nothing. We go to jail. We can't do anything, Brandon said, shaking his head. There is security. There are cameras. Think, Brandon. Vanessa snapped. He is at the old estate house, not the mansion. The old house is secluded. And if he is dying, he is confused. He is weak. She stopped pacing and turned to him. Her face was set in a hard stone mask. We have to go there, she said. Go there. To visit him, to finish it, she said coldly. We have to make sure he doesn't sign that will. Brandon stared at her. You mean, we go there, we break in, and we make sure nature takes its course, she said. Or we help it along. He is alone. He is sick. It would be so easy, Brandon. A pillow, a slip on the stairs, too much medication. Who would question it? He is already dying. You want me to kill him, Brandon whispered. The horror of it finally pierced through his greed. He is my father. He is the man who ruined you, Vanessa shouted. He is the man who cut you off. He is the man who is sending you to prison. Do you want to go to prison? Brandon, do you want to be someone's girlfriend in a cell for 10 years? Or do you want to be a millionaire? She grabbed his hands. She softened her voice, using the manipulation tactics she had mastered over years. Baby, listen to me. We are so close. We suffered so much. We deserve this. Just one night. One act. And then we are free. We can go to Europe. We can buy a boat. No more debts. No more police, just us. Rich and free. Brandon looked at her. He looked at the cracked phone. He thought about the audit. He thought about the humiliation. He thought about the $12 in his pocket. The hunger in his stomach gnawed at him. but the hunger for redemption, for power, was stronger. He stood up. The decision settled over him like a shroud. "How do we get in?" he asked. Vanessa smiled. It was a terrifying, victorious smile. "We take the back road," she said. "We park a mile out. We wear black. And we take what is ours." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a towel. She unwrapped it. It was a pistol, a small caliber handgun she had kept hidden from him for years. "Just in case," she said. Brandon looked at the gun. He looked at his wife. He realized then that there was no going back. They were not just thieves anymore. They were monsters. And tonight, they would prove it. "Let's go," Brandon said. They left the motel room, leaving the $12 on the nightstand. They didn't need it. Where they were going, they would either have everything or they would have nothing at all. They walked out into the night, driving toward the old estate house where I was waiting for them in the dark. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea they were the prey. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the asphalt of the long driveway leading up to the old estate house. This wasn't the suburban mansion where the party had been. This was the original homestead, a sprawling, creaking Victorian structure on 5 acres of woodland that I had bought 20 years ago. It was isolated, surrounded by tall pines and silence. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, or a murder. I stood on the front porch, my phone pressed to my ear. I made sure my voice was loud, carrying over the wind, just in case anyone was listening. Just in case Brandon still had friends on the payroll. "You are fired," I shouted into the phone. "All of you! I want the perimeter cleared immediately. I don't want to see a single security guard on this property in 10 minutes. I am handling my own business tonight." I hung up without waiting for a response. It was a lie, of course. The security team wasn't being fired for incompetence. They were being dismissed to create a vacuum. I was removing the sheepdogs so the wolves would feel safe enough to approach the flock. I watched as the 2 patrol cars stationed at the gate turned on their lights and rolled away their tires, crunching on the wet gravel. The red taillights faded into the mist. The gate was left wide open. The house was now defenseless. To the outside observer, I was a paranoid, dying old man pushing away his protectors in a fit of dementia-induced rage. To a predator, I was a sitting duck. I turned and walked inside, locking the heavy front door behind me. I didn't turn on the chandeliers. I kept the house dim lit, only by a single desk lamp in the library. I walked into that room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The library was set like a stage. I placed the document on the center of the heavy oak desk. It was the fake will I had drafted with Mr. Blackwood earlier that day. The text was large, easily readable from a distance. It explicitly revoked all prior trusts and bequeathed the entire Kowalski estate to the Chicago Feline Rescue Society. Next to the document, I placed my favorite fountain pen, uncapped, resting on the paper, as if I had just paused to catch my breath. I looked at the scene. It was perfect. It told a story of a man alone making a final, spiteful decision. It was the bait that would force them to act. They couldn't let me pick up that pen again. I checked my watch. 11:15 p.m. They would be coming soon. Desperation makes people drive fast. I left the library, leaving the door slightly ajar, so the light from the desk lamp spilled into the hallway, a beacon in the dark. I walked down the hall to the servants' quarters, opened the door to the wine cellar, and descended the stone steps. The wine cellar was cold, smelling of earth and cork. But I didn't stop there. I went to the back of the room behind the racks of vintage Bordeaux and keyed a code into a hidden panel. A section of the wall slid back silently, revealing the safe room I had installed a decade ago after a kidnapping threat against the company executives. The room was bathed in the cool blue glow of a bank of monitors. Miller was already there, sitting in a swivel chair, his eyes scanning the feeds. Standing behind him were 2 men in tactical gear and Detective Johnson. They were silent, their faces illuminated by the screens. I stepped inside, and the wall closed behind me, sealing us in. The air was recycled sterile. It felt like a submarine. "They are coming," I said. Miller nodded without looking away from the screens. We picked up a vehicle turning onto the service road 2 miles out. Lights off, moving slow. I pulled up a chair and sat next to him. My chest felt tight, the familiar squeeze of the COPD, but I didn't reach for my inhaler. I needed to feel this. I needed to feel the weight of what was about to happen. I looked at the monitors. The high-definition night vision cameras turned the dark grounds into a ghostly green landscape. I could see every tree, every bush, every blade of grass. We waited. The silence in the room was heavy. Detective Johnson checked his sidearm, a small metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet space. "There," Miller whispered. He pointed to the screen showing the east perimeter, the side of the property that bordered the dense woods. At first I didn't see anything, just the wind moving the branches. But then a shadow detached itself from the tree line. Then another. 2 figures. They were dressed in dark clothes, hoodies pulled up. They moved with a jerky, nervous energy. They weren't professionals. They were amateurs fueled by adrenaline and greed. I zoomed in on the camera feed. The resolution was crisp enough to see their faces. It was them. Brandon was in the lead. He looked terrified. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with his sleeve, his eyes darting left and right. He held a flashlight but didn't turn it on. Vanessa was right behind him. She looked different. Her face was a mask of grim determination. She wasn't scared. She was hunting. She was the one pushing him forward, whispering in his ear, her hand gripping his arm. They reached the back patio. Brandon tried the handle of the French doors. Locked. I watched as Vanessa reached into her bag. On the screen, the object was black and heavy. She handed it to Brandon. A glass cutter, a crowbar, no. It was the gun. Miller let out a low breath. "We have a weapon," he said, for the benefit of the recording. "Suspects are armed. This is now an armed intrusion." I felt a cold stone drop into my stomach. Seeing the gun was different than suspecting it. My son was holding a firearm. My son was standing on the porch of the house he grew up in, preparing to shoot his way in to stop me from giving away his inheritance. He hesitated. I could see him shaking. He looked at the gun, then at the door. He was having a moment of doubt. The boy I raised was fighting with the monster he had become. Vanessa didn't give him the chance to choose. She grabbed his wrist, steadying the weapon. She pointed to the glass pane near the lock. She said something to him. I couldn't hear it, but I could read her lips. "Do it, or we are dead." Brandon nodded. He wrapped the gun in a towel she handed him and smashed the butt against the glass. The sound was muffled by the towel and the thick walls of the safe room, but on the audio feed it was a sharp crunch. Glass tinkled onto the floor inside the kitchen. They reached through the hole and unlocked the door. They were in. "They are inside," Detective Johnson said into his radio. "All units hold positions. Let them commit to the interior. We want them deep in the trap." I watched them move through the kitchen on the interior cameras. They were creeping, guns raised. They weren't looking for valuables. They ignored the silverware, the electronics. They were moving with a single purpose. They were heading for the library. They passed the dining room. They passed the grand staircase. They were heading toward the light, toward the single desk lamp burning in the darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was watching my own murder in real time. If I had been sitting in that chair, if I had been the feeble old man they thought I would be dead in 30 seconds. They reached the hallway outside the library. They stopped. Vanessa peeked around the corner. She saw the empty chair. She saw the document on the desk. She signaled Brandon. They rushed into the room. Brandon went straight to the desk. He grabbed the paper. He read it frantically. I saw his shoulders slump in relief. It wasn't signed. He thought he had made it in time. Vanessa scanned the room. She was looking for me. She checked the corners. She checked behind the heavy curtains. Where is he? I could almost hear her scream. The library was empty. The house was silent. And that was when I reached for the control panel on the console in front of me. Now, Miller asked. Now, I said. I pressed the button that activated the main display in the library. On the monitor, I saw the 60-inch television mounted above the fireplace flare to life. The sudden light made Brandon and Vanessa jump. They spun around, weapons raised, aiming at the screen. But there was no one on the screen to shoot. Just a video file I had prepared. A video file that would tear them apart before the police even touched them. I leaned into the microphone that broadcasted into the library speakers. "Hello, son," I said. My voice boomed through the empty house, godlike and terrifying. "You are looking for me. But I think you should look at the screen instead." Brandon looked at the ceiling, looking for the source of the voice. Vanessa looked at the TV, and the video began to play. The sound of broken glass settling on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the kitchen for a long, terrible second. Then came the heavy thud of a boot stepping through the breach. They were inside. My son and his wife were standing in the home where I had raised him, not as family members coming for a visit, but as intruders wearing masks of shadow and hate. I watched them on the high-definition monitor in the safe room. The green tint of the night vision camera made them look like ghosts. Brandon was shaking. I could see the tremor in his hands as he swept the gun back and forth, aiming at the refrigerator, the stove, the empty chairs. He was terrified. But Vanessa was in her element. She stepped through the broken window with the grace of a cat. She didn't look at the furniture. She didn't look at the shadows. She looked at the layout. She was calculating. She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a bundle of thick black plastic. Zip ties, industrial strength, and a roll of duct tape. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They hadn't just come to kill me quickly. They had come to restrain me. They had come to silence me. The zip ties meant they planned to interrogate me or perhaps force me to sign something before they ended my life. I watched as Vanessa pulled a blue folder from her jacket. It was different from the one I had left on the desk in the library. This was their document, a forged will, no doubt, one that gave them everything, one that they needed my signature on, voluntary or otherwise. "Clear the ground floor," I saw Vanessa whisper. Her lips moved clearly on the 4K screen. "Check the servants' quarters. I will check the front." Brandon nodded. He moved toward the hallway that led to the guest rooms. He was walking like a man in a nightmare, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He held the gun with two hands, finger on the trigger. One sudden noise, one creak of the floorboards, and he would fire blindly. I switched the camera view to follow him. He kicked open the door to his old playroom. It was empty, just dust sheets covering the furniture. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead, even in the grain of the camera. He stopped at the bottom of the back stairs. He looked up into the darkness of the second floor. He looked paralyzed. "Move, Brandon," Vanessa hissed from the kitchen doorway. He jumped. He turned and glared at her, but he obeyed. He was a broken dog, obeying the master who held the leash. They met in the central foyer. The grand chandelier above them was dark, a spiderweb of crystal in the gloom. They stood on the Persian rug that my late wife had bought in Istanbul 30 years ago. They were muddying it with their wet boots. Upstairs, Brandon mouthed. "No," Vanessa signaled. She pointed toward the west wing, the library, the light. She had seen the faint glow spilling out from under the library door down the hall. It was the only light in the house. A beacon, a lure. They moved toward it. They moved differently now, slower, quieter. They knew their prey was close. Vanessa took the lead. She held the zip ties in one hand and a small, heavy taser in the other. I hadn't seen the taser before. She was full of surprises. They crept down the hallway, passing the portraits of our ancestors. My father, my grandfather, men who had worked in coal mines and steel mills so that Brandon could grow up in a mansion. He walked past their eyes without a shred of shame. They stopped outside the library door. It was slightly ajar. A sliver of golden light cut across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I held my breath in the safe room. Miller leaned forward, his hand hovering over the console. Detective Johnson unholstered his weapon, his eyes locked on the screen. They were right outside the trap. Vanessa peeked through the crack. She couldn't see the desk from that angle. She could only see the bookshelves and the fireplace. She pulled her head back. She looked at Brandon. She held up 3 fingers. 1. She tightened her grip on the taser. 2. Brandon raised the gun, aiming it at chest height. 3. They burst into the room. Brandon swept the room with the muzzle of the gun, pivoting left, then right. Hands up, he shouted, his voice cracking. Vanessa rushed toward the high-backed leather chair behind the desk, the taser crackling with blue electricity ready to drop an old man to the floor. But the chair was empty. They froze. The momentum of their violence had nowhere to go. They stood in the center of the library, panting, weapons drawn, surrounding an empty desk. Brandon lowered the gun slightly. "He is not here," he whispered. Vanessa spun around, her eyes scanning the shadows, the heavy velvet drapes, the corners of the room. "He has to be here. The light is on." She walked to the desk. She saw the document I had left. The fake will leaving everything to the cat shelter. She snatched it up. Her eyes scanned the text. "No," she hissed. "No, no, no." "What?" Brandon asked, stepping closer. "He is giving it away," she screamed, forgetting to whisper. "He is giving it to a damn cat charity. He is mocking us." She crumpled the paper in her fist and threw it across the room. She looked deranged. The cool, calculating mask had slipped, revealing the frantic greed underneath. "Find him!" she shrieked. "He is in the house. We have to find him before he signs the real one." Brandon looked around wildly. "Dad, come out. We just want to talk. Vanessa laughed, a manic sound. "We are done talking. Search the closets. Search under the desk. He is an old man with bad lungs. He can't have gone far." They began to tear the room apart. Brandon overturned the heavy globe stand. Vanessa ripped the curtains from the windows. They were destroying the room in a blind panic. I watched them from the safety of my bunker. I watched the destruction. I watched the hate. And then I reached out and pressed the button. The 60-inch screen above the fireplace, which had been black and silent, suddenly flared to brilliant life. The white light flooded the room, blinding them. They spun around Brandon, raising his gun again, aiming at the television. But it wasn't a live feed. It was a pre-recorded video. On the screen, a scene began to play. It wasn't me. It wasn't the police. It was a bedroom, a hotel room. And in the center of the frame, clear as day, was Vanessa. But she wasn't with Brandon. She was with a man. A man Brandon knew very well. A man who was supposed to be his lawyer. Brandon lowered the gun. He stared at the screen. His mouth opened. Vanessa went still. The color drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. And that was when I leaned into the microphone. "Hello, son," I said, my voice amplified through the hidden speakers in the library walls. "You are looking for a dying old man, but I think you should be looking at your wife." The trap had snapped shut, but the jaws weren't steel. The jaws were the truth, and they were about to tear my son apart. The 60-inch screen commanded the room, a rectangle of blinding white light that slowly resolved into a high-definition nightmare. Brandon stood frozen, the gun hanging limply at his side, his eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the digital glow. Vanessa was beside him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook, the taser slipping from her numb fingers to clatter onto the hardwood floor. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at a police feed. They were looking at a room they recognized, a room that smelled of betrayal. It was the interior of a luxury suite at the Four Seasons downtown. The timestamp in the corner of the video read 2 weeks ago. I had my investigator Miller place the cameras there after we tracked Vanessa's location data. She wasn't visiting her sick mother. She wasn't shopping for baby clothes. She was meeting with the one man Brandon trusted to handle his legal defense against the audit. She was meeting with Richard, his personal attorney, his college roommate, his best friend. On the screen, the image was crisp. Vanessa was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, wearing a silk robe that Brandon had bought her for their anniversary. Richard was standing by the window pouring 2 glasses of champagne. They looked comfortable. They looked like a couple. But it was the audio amplified by the library's surround sound system that tore through the silence of the estate house like a chainsaw. So he really thinks he can beat the audit. Vanessa's voice on the recording was amused. Light completely devoid of the stress she showed Brandon every day. Richard laughed, handing her a glass. Brandon couldn't beat a parking ticket without help, Ness. He is drowning. The books are a mess. He stole way more than $500,000. He is sloppy. Vanessa took a sip of the champagne. I know he is sloppy. He is a useless idiot. That is why I married him. He was supposed to be the easy mark, the bridge to the old man's money. In the library, the real Brandon let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He took a step toward the television, as if he could physically stop the words coming out of the speakers. You said he was smart, Richard said on the screen sitting next to her. You said he was going to run the company. I lied, Vanessa said, leaning back. I needed a husband who wouldn't ask questions when I moved money around. I needed a puppet. But now, well, he is just dead weight. Once we get the inheritance, once the old man kicks the bucket, I am filing for divorce. I am taking my half, and I am gone. Richard stroked her hair. And what about the kid? What about the heir to the Kowalski throne? Vanessa smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile that I had seen before, but Brandon never had. What heir? She asked. The baby, Richard said. Brandon's kid. Vanessa laughed. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound that echoed hauntingly in the dark library. Richard. Honey, do you really think I would let that loser touch me without protection? He thinks it is his. He thinks he is going to be a daddy. It is pathetic. Then whose is it? Richard asked. Vanessa reached out and touched Richard's face. Yours, obviously. The timing is perfect. We take the money, we let Brandon go to jail for the embezzlement, and we raise our kid on a beach in Italy. The video froze there. I paused it on that frame. Vanessa touching Richard's face. The smile of triumph. The confession of paternity fraud. The absolute total annihilation of Brandon's life. The silence in the library was heavy, suffocating. It was broken only by the sound of the rain against the windows and Brandon's ragged breathing. He turned slowly to look at his wife. His face was a mask of shock that was rapidly crumbling into something darker, something primal. He looked like a man who had woken up to find his own skin was burning. Vanessa, he whispered. His voice was unrecognizable. Tell me that is fake. Tell me that is AI. Tell me you didn't say that. Vanessa backed away. She hit the edge of the desk and stumbled. Her eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for a lie that could save her. But there were no lies left. The video was irrefutable. The intimacy, the casual cruelty, it was all there in 4K resolution. Brandon, she stammered, holding her hands up. You have to listen. That was out of context. We were joking. It was a role play. You know, Richard, we were just talking trash. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, Brandon repeated. He raised the gun. His hand was shaking violently now. You called me a useless idiot. You said you are sending me to jail. He took a step toward her. And the baby, he asked, his voice cracking. Is it his? Is my child? His Vanessa's face hardened. She realized the pleading wouldn't work. She realized she was cornered. And when Vanessa was cornered, she attacked. So what if it is? She screamed, her voice shrill and venomous. Look at you, Brandon. Look at yourself. You are a failure. You lost your job. You lost your money. You are crying in a dark room holding a gun you don't have the guts to use. Of course, I slept with Richard. He is a winner. He has a plan. You have nothing. The words hit him like bullets. I watched from the safe room as my son's soul seemed to evaporate, replaced by a pure, white-hot rage. He had lost his father. He had lost his fortune. And now he realized he had never even had a wife. He had been a mark, a puppet, a joke. You used me, Brandon whispered. The gun steadied. The shaking stopped. I survived, Vanessa shouted back. That is what I do. I survive. And you are just a stepping stone. A cracked, broken stepping stone. She laughed at him. Even with a gun pointed at her chest, her arrogance was so deep, so ingrained, that she couldn't help but mock him. She thought he was too weak to pull the trigger. She thought she still held the leash. Go ahead, she taunted. Shoot me. Add murder to your list of failures. You won't do it. You love me too much. You are obsessed with me. You are nothing without me. Brandon stared at her. He looked at the woman he had stolen for. The woman he had assaulted his own father for. He saw the monster beneath the makeup. I don't love you, he said, his voice dead flat. I hate you. He cocked the hammer of the pistol. The metallic click was loud in the room. Vanessa's eyes went wide. She stopped laughing. She realized finally that she had pushed him too far. Brandon, no! She whimpered, raising her hands again. Wait. We can fix this. We can still get the money. We can— Shut up, Brandon roared. I leaned forward in the safe room. Miller's hand was on the radio. Detective Johnson was already speaking into his headset. Go! Johnson shouted. Breach! Breach, breach. They are going to kill each other, but they were too far away. The tactical team was outside, stacking up at the broken kitchen door. They had to run through the house. It would take them 20 seconds. 20 seconds is a lifetime when a gun is pointed at a heart. Brandon, I said into the microphone, my voice booming through the speakers again. Put the gun down. She isn't worth it. Do not throw your life away for a lie. He looked up at the ceiling. He heard me, but he didn't lower the weapon. He looked back at Vanessa. She ruined me, Dad, he said to the empty room. She took everything. And then he lunged. He didn't shoot. He charged at her, tackling her to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under the sofa. They became a tangle of limbs and fury. Brandon was screaming a guttural animal sound of pure anguish. He had his hands around her throat. Vanessa was clawing at his face, her nails digging deep furrows into his skin, kicking and thrashing. It was ugly. It was violent. It was the implosion of a relationship built on rot. I watched as my son tried to strangle his wife. I watched as she gouged at his eyes. Stop them, I whispered. The library doors burst open. The tactical team flooded the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices shouting commands. Police, get down! Get off her! They pulled Brandon off Vanessa. It took 3 men to subdue him. He was fighting with the strength of a madman, foaming at the mouth, screaming that he wanted to kill her. They pinned him to the floor, zip-tying his hands behind his back. Vanessa scrambled backward, coughing and gasping, clutching her throat. She looked up at the police officers, her face streaked with blood, Brandon's blood and her own. "He tried to kill me," she rasped, pointing a shaking finger at Brandon. "He is crazy. He broke in, he kidnapped me." Even now, choking on the floor, she was trying to spin the story. She was trying to frame him. One of the officers looked down at her. He didn't offer her a hand. He reached for his handcuffs. "Vanessa Kowalski," he said, "you are under arrest for breaking and entering conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." "Me," she shrieked as he cuffed her. "I am the victim, not tonight," the officer said. "I watched them drag my son and his wife out of the library. They were broken, bloody, and screaming at each other. The perfect couple. The king and queen." I turned off the microphone. I sat back in my chair in the safe room. The silence returned heavy and final. Miller looked at me. "It is over, Bernie. We got them." I looked at the monitor at the empty library with the overturned furniture and the fake will still lying on the floor. "No," I said. "It is not over. Now comes the hard part. Now I have to bury them." The library smelled of spent gunpowder and copper blood. The air was thick with the heavy panting breaths of the officers who had wrestled my son to the ground. I watched on the monitor as they hauled Brandon to his feet. He was a ruin of a man. His face was scratched and bleeding where Vanessa's nails had found purchase, his expensive shirt torn to ribbons, his eyes wild and unfocused. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at Vanessa, who was slumped against the wall, handcuffed, gasping for air through a bruised throat. The hatred radiating between them was toxic. It was a physical thing, denser than the smoke from the flashlights. They had gone into that room as conspirators united by greed. They were leaving it as mortal enemies bound by nothing but mutual destruction. I stood up in the safe room. My legs felt heavy not from age but from the sheer weight of the tragedy. "Let's go," I said to Miller. We left the bunker, the hidden door sliding shut behind us with a hiss. We walked up the stone steps of the wine cellar and into the main hallway of the house. It was silent now, save for the crackle of police radios. We walked past the portraits of my ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to judge the chaos that had just unfolded. I walked out the front door and onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the night air cold and crisp. The driveway was a sea of flashing red and blue lights. The ambulance had arrived, its siren chirping once before her falling silent. They were bringing them out. First came Vanessa. 2 officers had her by the arms. She was kicking her heels, scraping against the wet gravel. Her hair, usually so perfect, was a rat's nest of tangles and blood. She saw me standing on the porch, illuminated by the floodlights. She froze. "You," she screamed, her voice raw. "You set us up, you sick old bastard. You planned this." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. I looked at the woman who had poisoned my soup, the woman who had stolen narcotics from the dying, the woman who had tried to convince the world I was a monster. She looked small now, pathetic. Then came Brandon. He wasn't fighting. He was walking like a dead man, his head hanging low, his feet dragging. He looked up when he reached the bottom of the stairs. He saw me. He stopped. The officers tried to push him forward, but he planted his feet. He stared at me with eyes that were black holes of despair. "Dad," he whispered. The word was a ghost. I walked down the steps. 1, 2, 3. I stopped on the bottom landing, looking down at them from a height of only a few feet, but it felt like miles. "You told me I was dead," Brandon said, his voice cracking. "You told me to kill you. I told you to make a choice." I corrected him, my voice calm and steady in the night air. "I gave you an open door. I gave you an empty house. I gave you every opportunity to turn around, to go home, to walk away." I pointed at the police car. But you didn't walk away. You broke in. You brought a gun. You brought zip ties. You didn't come here to talk, son. You came here to bury me. Brandon began to weep. It was an ugly, wet sound. I didn't know about Vanessa. She lied to me. She used me. And you let her, I said. You let her because it was easy. You let her because you wanted the money more than you wanted your father. You sold your soul for a penthouse and a paternity lie. Vanessa spat on the ground near my feet. Don't listen to him, Brandon. He is trying to get in your head. He is the enemy. I turned my gaze to her. It was cold enough to freeze the blood in her veins. I am not your enemy, Vanessa, I said softly. I am the man who paid your bills. I am the man who put a roof over your head. I am the man who welcomed you into this family when no one else would, and you repaid me with arsenic. Her eyes widened. She hadn't known that I knew about the poison. That was the final card. The toxicology report is with the district attorney, I told her. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. You aren't going to a country club prison, Vanessa. You are going to a place where your manipulation won't work. The officers began to move them toward the cars. Brandon stumbled, his knees giving out. He looked at me one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated regret. Dad, please, he begged. Help me. I am your son. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slapped me, the man who had choked his wife, the man who had pointed a gun at an empty chair ready to kill. My son died a long time ago, I said. You are just a stranger who shares his name. I turned my back on them. Wait, Brandon screamed as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. Dad, wait! The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Vanessa was loaded into the second car, still cursing, still blaming everyone but herself. The engines roared to life. The convoy began to move, rolling down the long driveway, the lights fading into the darkness of the trees. I stood there on the gravel, the damp cold seeping into my bones. Miller walked up beside me. He offered me a cigarette, then remembered my lungs and put it away. It is done, Miller said. I looked at the empty driveway. I looked at the house that had been a trap and was now a crime scene. They did it to themselves, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to pull a trigger. I just had to turn on the lights. I took a deep breath of the night air. It was cold, but it was clean. For the first time in months, I didn't taste the metallic tang of poison. I didn't feel the fog of sedatives. I felt pain, yes, a terrible, crushing grief for the boy I had lost. But underneath the pain there was something else. Freedom. I turned and walked back up the stairs into the empty house. I had a lot of work to do. I had a legacy to rebuild. And this time I was going to build it for people who deserved it. The war was over. The silence had returned. And in the silence, I finally found my peace. The gavel did not bang. It fell like the blade of a guillotine slicing through the murmurs of the packed courtroom. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's table, my hands resting on the head of my cane. I did not need the cane to walk anymore. My lungs were clearing and my strength was returning, but I liked the weight of it. It felt like a weapon. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and thick with the smell of desperation. To my left sat the press, hungrily scribbling notes on their pads, waiting for the final act of the tragedy that had captivated the city for months. To my right, the jury sat in stone-faced silence, 12 strangers who held the power of life and death in their hands. And in front of me sat the defendants. They were not sitting together. The defense table had been split, a physical manifestation of the war that had erupted between them. Brandon sat on the far left, hunched over in a suit that was 2 sizes too big for him now. He had lost 30 pounds in county jail. His hair was thinning, his skin sallow, and he refused to lift his head. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the belt. Vanessa sat on the far right. She was different. Jail had not broken her, it had hardened her. She wore a modest gray blouse and no makeup, a calculated attempt to look like a victim, but her eyes were darting around the room, scanning the jury, scanning the judge, scanning me. She was still calculating. She was still sorting for an angle. The trial had been a spectacle of mutual destruction. For 3 days, I had watched my son and his wife tear each other apart. Brandon's lawyer, a public defender who looked exhausted, painted a picture of a weak-minded husband manipulated by a sociopathic wife. He argued that Brandon was a victim of coercive control, that he had only gone to the estate house because he was afraid Vanessa would leave him. Vanessa's lawyer. A shark she had somehow convinced to take her case pro bono on the promise of future book rights, argued the exact opposite. He painted Brandon as a violent, abusive tyrant who had forced his terrified wife to participate in his schemes. He claimed Vanessa was only holding the taser because she feared for her life. They were rats in a bucket climbing over each other to escape the rising water. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. And it was about to get much worse. The district attorney stood up. She was a woman named Ms. Sterling, sharp as a razor and twice as cold. She walked to the center of the room holding a single manila folder. The room went silent. This was the moment we had been waiting for. The charges up until now had been severe breaking and entering assault conspiracy. But today the charges were changing. "Your Honor," Ms. Sterling said, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "The people moved to amend the charges against both defendants. Based on new forensic evidence processed by the state lab, we are adding 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Brandon's head snapped up. Vanessa went rigid. "Attempted murder?" Brandon's lawyer stammered, standing up. "Your Honor, this is absurd. There was no physical attack on the victim. No shots were fired." Ms. Sterling did not look at the defense. She looked at the jury. She opened the folder and held up a piece of paper. "This is a toxicology report, derived from hair and blood samples taken from Mr. Bernard Kowalski 3 days before the incident at the estate. It shows lethal concentrations of arsenic and benzodiazepines." She walked toward the jury box, holding the paper up for them to see. "For 6 months," she continued, "the defendants did not just plan to steal from the victim. They were actively killing him. They were poisoning his food. They were lacing his inhalers with sedatives. They were manufacturing a slow, painful death to facilitate an early inheritance. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was an execution in progress." Brandon let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "I didn't know," he shouted, standing up and knocking his chair back. "I didn't know about the poison. She did it. Vanessa cooked. Vanessa gave him the meds. I swear to God I didn't know." "Sit down, Mr. Kowalski," the judge roared, banging the gavel. "You liar!" Vanessa shrieked, leaping to her feet, her mask of modesty shattering instantly. "You bought the rat poison, Brandon. You said it was for the basement. You knew. You wanted him dead faster than I did. You called him a useless old leech every night." "Order," the judge shouted. "Order in this court." Bailiffs rushed forward, forcing Brandon and Vanessa back into their seats. They were screaming at each other now, spewing hate and accusations that only served to tighten the noose around both their necks. The jury watched with wide eyes. The doubt was gone. These were not innocent people. These were monsters. I watched them. I watched the son I had held in my arms as a baby scream that his wife was the poisoner. I watched the woman I had welcomed into my home scream that my son was the architect of my death. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. The last ember of fatherly love I had been holding onto finally flickered and died. "Mr. Kowalski," the district attorney said, turning to me, The prosecution calls Bernard Kowalski to the stand. I stood up. The room seemed to tilt, but I gripped my cane and walked forward. The click of the wood against the floor was a steady rhythm. Click, step, click, step. I walked past Brandon. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he whispered. "Please." I did not look at him. I walked past Vanessa. She did not whisper. She glared, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. I took the stand. I raised my right hand. I swore to tell the truth. Ms. Sterling approached the stand. She was gentle now, respectful. "Mr. Kowalski," she asked, "you heard the defendants arguing just now. You heard your son claim he did not know about the poison. Do you believe him?" I looked at the jury. I looked at the 12 men and women who would decide the fate of my family. It does not matter if he knew the name of the poison. I said, my voice raspy but loud. He watched me get sick. He watched me struggle to breathe. He watched me fall asleep at the dinner table. And he did not call a doctor. He called a lawyer to see if he could get the power of attorney. He watched his father dying, and he saw only a payday. That is not ignorance. That is malice. Brandon put his head in his hands and wept loudly. Mr. Kowalski, the defense attorney for Brandon, stood up. He looked tired. He knew he was fighting a losing battle, but he had to try. "Sir," he said, "your son is a broken man. He has lost everything. He has no prior criminal record. He was under extreme financial duress. He was manipulated by a woman who has a history of fraud. We are asking for leniency. We are asking you as a father. Do you really want to see your only child die in prison?" The room held its breath. This was the moment where the grieving father usually cracks, the moment where the victim asks for mercy. I looked at Brandon. I looked at the man who had slapped me, the man who had choked his wife, the man who had pointed a gun at my empty chair. I leaned into the microphone. "I spent 40 years building roads," I said. "I moved mountains of earth and laid miles of asphalt to connect cities. I built a company from nothing. I worked 18-hour days so that boy could have the best schools, the best clothes, the best life. I thought I was building a future for him." I paused, taking a breath. But I made a mistake. I built the road, but I forgot to teach him how to drive. I gave him the world, but I forgot to teach him the value of it. I created a man who believes he is entitled to everything and responsible for nothing. I looked directly at the judge. "Leniency is for mistakes, Your Honor. Leniency is for accidents. What my son did was not a mistake. It was a choice. He chose greed over love. He chose murder over work. He chose to erase me." I turned back to Brandon. His eyes met mine. They were begging. "If I ask for leniency now," I continued, "I am not saving him. I am enabling him one last time. I am finishing the job of ruining him. He needs to face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in his life, he needs to pay the bill." The defense attorney sat down. He had nothing left to say. Vanessa's lawyer stood up. He didn't even bother with the mercy angle. He tried to attack my character. "Mr. Kowalski, isn't it true that you set a trap? Isn't it true? You lured them to the house. Isn't it true? You are a vindictive man who enjoys punishing his children." I smiled. It was a cold, dry smile. "I set a dinner table counselor," I said. "I put out the plates. I lit the candles. But I didn't force them to eat. They came to my house with a gun and zip ties. They came to hunt. The fact that the rabbit had teeth does not make the wolf innocent." The lawyer sat down. Ms. Sterling looked at me. "No further questions." "Your Honor." I stepped down from the stand. I walked back to my seat. I did not look at Brandon as I passed. I could hear him sobbing, a low, broken sound that might have broken my heart a year ago. But today it just sounded like noise. The jury was sent out to deliberate. It did not take long. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the toxicology report, the audio confessions, the spectacle in the courtroom. They returned in 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. Conspiracy. Fraud. Breaking and entering. The judge asked the defendants if they had anything to say before sentencing. Vanessa stood up. She looked at me. "I hope you rot in hell, old man," she spat. Brandon could not stand. He remained seated, shaking his head, mumbling, "I am sorry, I am sorry, I am sorry," over and over again, like a broken record. The judge looked at them over his spectacles. "In all my years on the bench," he said, "I have never seen a case of such profound familial betrayal. You bit the hand that fed you, and when that wasn't enough, you tried to cut it off." He sentenced Vanessa to 30 years without the possibility of parole. He sentenced Brandon to 25 years. As the bailiffs moved in to take them away, Brandon lunged not at me, but at the air, reaching out as if he could grab the life he had thrown away. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, look at me." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I turned my back on the court, on the judge, on my son. I walked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room. "Dad," Brandon screamed again, his voice fading as he was dragged through the side door into the holding cells. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the hallway. The flashbulbs of the press blinded me for a second, but I kept walking. Miller was waiting for me by the elevators. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. "It is over," I said. Miller pressed the button for the lobby. "It is over, Bernie." We stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the noise of the courthouse, shutting out the screams of my son. The silence was heavy, but it was clean. I took a deep breath. My lungs hurt less today. The poison was leaving my system. The cancer of my family had been cut out. I was scarred. I was alone. But I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, the air tasted sweet. The judge cleared his throat, and the sound echoed through the silent courtroom like thunder rolling in the distance. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at the two people who had once been my family. The papers in his hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the gravity of the decision he was about to finalize. He looked at Vanessa first. She was standing, but she was swaying, as if the floor beneath her had turned into the deck of a ship in a storm. Vanessa Kowalski, the judge, said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "For the crimes of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud against a vulnerable elderly person, you are sentenced to 30 years in the state penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served at least 85% of your sentence." Vanessa let out a strangled cry. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. 30 years. She was 28. She would be an old woman by the time she saw the outside world again. The beauty she had weaponized, the youth she had used as currency, it would all rot away in a concrete cell. She had gambled her life for a fortune she didn't earn, and she had lost everything. Then the judge turned his eyes to Brandon. My son stood up slowly. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. But the monster wasn't under the bed anymore. The monster was standing in the suit I had paid for. "Brandon Kowalski," the judge continued, "the betrayal of a parent is a specific kind of cruelty. You owed this man your life and your livelihood. Instead, you tried to take his breath. For your crimes, you are sentenced to 25 years. May God have mercy on your soul, because the law certainly does not." 25 years. The number hung in the air. A quarter of a century. I did the math in my head. I would be 93 when he walked free, if I was still alive. The realization hit us both at the same time. This was it. This was the end of our time together on this earth. The bailiffs moved in efficiently. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut was the final punctuation mark on the sentence. They pulled Vanessa up, dragging her toward the side door. She was screaming now, cursing the judge, cursing me, cursing the world. But Brandon did not scream. He stopped. He planted his feet and looked across the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. He looked at me. The courtroom seemed to dissolve. The jury, the judge, the press. They all faded into the background until it was just the two of us. Father and son connected by blood and divided by poison. His eyes were red-rimmed and wide, filled with a terror I had never seen before. But beneath the terror, there was something else. A profound, crushing regret. It wasn't the regret of getting caught. It was the regret of a man realizing he had burned down the only shelter he ever had. His lips moved silently, forming the word "Dad" one last time. He looked like he wanted to run to me to hide behind my legs like he did when he was few. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to write a check, or call a lawyer, or make the bad men go away. For a heartbeat, I felt the old instinct rise up. The instinct to protect him. The instinct to save him. But then I remembered the taste of the soup. I remembered the tightness in my chest. I remembered the slap on the patio. I looked at him and I let my face go blank. I did not frown. I did not cry. I simply killed the hope in his eyes with my indifference. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and turned my back on him. I heard him gasp a sharp intake of breath, as if I had hit him. I walked away. I walked down the aisle toward the heavy wooden doors, my cane clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. Behind me I heard the shuffle of feet and the heavy door to the holding cells slamming shut. I did not look back. I kept walking forward into the light of the hallway, leaving the darkness of my past locked in a cage behind me. The autumn leaves were turning gold along the long driveway of the estate, painting the world in shades of fire and amber. 1 year ago, this road had been a path to a potential execution, slick with rain and dread. Today, it was paved with fresh asphalt and lined with parked cars, not police cruisers, but beat-up sedans and trucks belonging to the students. I stood on the porch, the same spot where I had watched my son being dragged away in handcuffs. But the silence that had haunted this place was gone. It had been replaced by the hum of diesel engines, the clang of tools on metal, and the shouting of young voices. I took a deep breath. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and engine oil. My chest expanded. There was no rattle. There was no wheeze. The tightness that had been my constant companion for years had loosened its grip. The doctors were amazed. They said my lung function had improved by 20% since the toxins cleared my system. It turned out that a significant part of my disease wasn't the diesel fumes from the 80s. It was the arsenic in my soup. I wasn't dying of old age. I was being murdered by inches. Now I felt lighter. I felt cleaner. I felt like a man who had been given a second lifetime. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching on the gravel. I didn't use the cane today. I left it leaning by the door. I walked toward the converted garage, which was now a state-of-the-art mechanic shop. This was the Kowalski Trade Initiative. I had taken the money I saved from the leeches, the tuition for Olivia, the allowance for Brandon, the shopping sprees for Vanessa, and I had put it into this. I was teaching kids from the foster system how to fix engines, how to drive rigs, how to build a life with their hands. I was giving them the tools I had given Brandon, but I was also teaching them the work ethic he had never learned. Inside the garage, a young man named Leo was struggling with the transmission of an old Ford. Leo was 19, covered in grease, with a past that involved more foster homes than birthdays. He looked up when I entered, wiping his forehead with a rag. "Mr. K," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "This thing is stuck. I can't get the torque right." I walked over. I didn't just watch. I rolled up my sleeves. "Let me see," I said. I leaned into the engine block. My hands, still strong, found the bolt. I showed him the angle. "It is not about force, Leo," I told him. It is about leverage. You have to respect the machine. If you fight it, it breaks. If you work with it, it runs. Leo tried again. The bolt turned. He smiled a wide, genuine grin that lit up his face. Thanks, Mr. K, that smile. It was worth more than every country club membership Brandon had ever demanded. It was real. I patted Leo on the shoulder. Good job. Keep going. I walked back outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. I walked to the edge of the property where the woods began. I thought about Brandon. I knew he was in a cell right now, probably staring at a concrete wall. I wondered if he thought about me. I wondered if he hated me. I realized with a start that I didn't care. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a neutral, quiet space. He was a chapter in a book I had finished reading. I sat down on the wooden bench I had built overlooking the valley. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single cigar. It was a victory cigar, the kind I used to smoke when I landed a big contract. I held it in my fingers, feeling the texture of the leaf. I knew I shouldn't. My lungs were better, but they weren't new. But today was an anniversary. It was the anniversary of the night I decided to live. I struck a match. The flame flared bright and hot against the twilight. I held it to the tip of the cigar, puffing gently until the ember glowed cherry red. I took one slow, shallow drag. The smoke swirled around me, rich and earthy. I held it in my mouth for a moment, tasting the freedom, then blew it out into the wind. I watched the smoke dissipate, disappearing into the clean air. I didn't take another puff. One was enough. I pressed the cigar into the stone ashtray, extinguishing it. I sat there alone as the stars began to come out. For 45 years, I had defined myself as a provider, a father, a victim of my own generosity. I had let people carve pieces out of me until there was almost nothing left. But sitting there listening to the distant laughter of the students packing up for the day, I realized who I really was. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't just an old man with a heavy checkbook. I was a builder. I had built a company. I had built a trap to catch a monster. And now, I was building a future for kids who actually wanted it. I leaned back, closing my eyes, listening to the wind in the trees. I was alone, yes. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was just Bernie Kowalski, and I was still standing. Looking back, I realized that for too long I confused enablement with love. I thought that by giving my son everything I never had, I was protecting him. In reality, I was crippling him. I learned that respect is not a gift you give to family simply because they share your blood. It is a currency that must be earned. When you allow people to treat you like a doormat, do not be surprised when they walk all over you. The hardest but most necessary lesson of my life was understanding that sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. Peace is expensive, but it is worth every single penny. If you believe that respect should never be compromised, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven them, or did they get exactly what they deserved?